Coming up, D-backs take care of business in Chicago. And does anyone want that third wildcard spot in the National League wildcard race? Discussing all that with Sully Baseball next.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day listening to the always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. If you want to see more content by me, just follow me on Twitter at CreatorThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks, both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, and all that, so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free and available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. We're going to be talking to Sully Baseball about the National League wildcard race, why it feels like no one wants to grab that third spot in the wildcard race, talk about the Brewers, why they're struggling. But let's first stay with the hometown team and talk about the D-backs, because I'm kind of surprised. The D-backs just went into Chicago and pulled off a sweep, the SCHWEEP sweep. That's what the D-backs just did, taking 3 straight games from the White Sox. And this was really interesting, that the fact that the D-backs did this, because I did a podcast probably a couple weeks now about how the road to the playoffs goes through Arizona, because the D-backs are going to be playing a lot of teams in that wild card race. The Padres, of course, we're going to be playing the Phillies upcoming next, another team in that National League wild card race. And then we played the Chicago White Sox, just swept them. And the White Sox are fighting for their playoff lives, and the D-backs might have just put a dagger in all their playoff hopes, because now the White Sox are about 6 games back from both their division leader and the wild card spot. So they couldn't afford a series of missteps. They had to play and try to win as many games as possible. Not a hot take, obvious take. Leading up to, when the playoffs start, the White Sox are fighting for their lives, and they thought maybe a team like the D-backs was going to be an opponent, not really playing for anything at this point in the season, just kind of floundering in no man's land, not going to get a top 5 pick, but also not going to make the postseason, just kind of in dead man's land. And it's like, if you're the White Sox, you're like, why are the D-backs going to come in here and try to win games? It's not like they have to try and win anything. We're going to be the more desperate team, and we're the team that's actually trying to make the postseason. But I guess they didn't perform like the more desperate team, because the D-backs, if you didn't know each team's record, you would have thought the D-backs were the team fighting for a wild card spot, because the D-backs in the second half of the season have been a very good team. They are now 19-15 to start the second half since the All-Star break. They are plus 33 in run differential, and they were just looking good and clicking on all cylinders. And when we just look at this series, their offense was clicking. The first 2 games of the series, you had 7 runs in the first game, 10 runs in the second game. You didn't really do too much in the finale, but in all 3 games, the second inning was really the turning point for the D-backs, because in the first game, that second inning, the D-backs were able to put 6 runs on the board, and that was able to control the rest of the game. In the second game of the series, the D-backs were able to put 5 runs on the board. And in today's finale, they took the lead 1-0 off a stone-cold Garrett home run to start the game. So the second inning is where the D-backs took the lead in all 3 games of the series. I don't know why that is. I don't know what mojo's going on in the second inning, but it was really their helpful inning this year. And what I also like from those first 2 games, when you look at that second inning, they were crooked numbers. 6 runs in that first game, like I mentioned, 5 runs in the second. It was a sequence, a string of hits, guys back-to-back getting hits, someone stealing a base, someone taking an extra base, and then that guy hitting a sacrifice fly or getting another single to move the runner over or bring him home. Like, it was just great execution by the offense. And we also saw some amazing defensive highlights by this D-backs defense as well over the weekend, from Alek Thomas making diving catches in the alley, on the warning track, Dalton Varsho robbing people at the wall. Like, we got to get a glimpse of how good this D-backs defense is defensively. We see it all the time, but it's always a nice reminder when they're making these highlight defensive real plays. out there, because they needed to do that. The defense needed to do that to help out their pitchers, because the pitchers were throwing gems all series, and you don't want to see your defense be the ones that, the reason why you lose. Like, your pitchers pitching great, but they're hitting it right to the defenders, and the defenders are making boneheaded plays. So it was great to see the defenders actually picking up the slack and doing extra work, doing overtime when it comes to playing defense with the plays that Dalton Varsho and Alec Thomas were making, because the pitchers in this series were great. Tom Henry, that first game, 5 innings, 1 earned run. Then you had Merrill Kelly. He was a little shaky, but he was still able to manage and push through into the 8th inning and give up only 4 earned runs with 7 strikeouts. Like, you'll still take that from Merrill Kelly. And then Zach Davies today, like, up until that 6th inning, was going blow for blow with Dylan Cease, who looks like he's going to be a top 3 Cy Young Award candidate in the American League. So the D-backs, from an offensive standpoint, from a pitching standpoint, they looked really good this series, and they were able to sweep the Chicago White Sox for their 3rd sweep of the season. So it's not something they do often. Their 2nd sweep since the All-Star break, because if you remember, the D-backs took 2 out of 3 against the Nationals in their first game of the series out the All-Star break. And then they played the San Francisco Giants, NL West rival, and swept them in the 2nd series out the All-Star break. So D-backs now have 2 series sweep since the All-Star break. And I want to mention, before I forget, a hero from this series, both in the 2nd game of this series and in the finale today. Jake McCarthy has been absolutely phenomenal, and Jake McCarthy splits now on the season. Let me see, right here. A 291 average, a 352 OBP, and a 432 slugging. He's going to have like a 290 average and a near 800 OPS by the time the season ends, in around 80 games, with maybe 16 stolen bases and 6 home runs. Like, he's having a really good series. He's having a really good season in second half. And in game 2 against the White Sox, he had 4 hits. He had 3 runs scored, was huge against the White Sox in game 2 in that 10-run outburst. And then today, to break the tie in the 9th inning, a double with 2 on. Absolutely phenomenal series by Jake McCarthy, who just continues to impress. And it's like, we already know about Dalton Varsho and Alec Thomas going to be 2 solidified spots in the outfield next season. And Corbin Carroll is probably going to be called up in September, most likely. And if he's not, he's definitely going to get the Alec Thomas treatment next season, where he's called up relatively early in the season and then is starting the rest of the way, right? So we know the outfield next season, 80% of the time, 80+% of the time, is going to have a combination of Varsho, Corbin Carroll, and Alec Thomas next season. We know that. But we also know the D-backs have great depth in their outfield, with Jake McCarthy as your go-to left-handed bat, 4th outfielder, and probably Stone Garrett as maybe your 5th outfielder, right-handed bat. And I just love the depth that the D-backs have in the outfield right now. They have so many pieces, and maybe you package some of those pieces for other areas of need that you have on your team, like another starting pitcher, another bullpen arm, whatever it is. But I love this D-backs team right now, how they're playing the second half of the season. They're playing, spoiler, I said the road to the playoffs went through the D-backs, and now they play the Philadelphia Phillies, who have been hot. So for the D-backs who are not playing for anything, they can play spoiler once again against the Phillies, and they can also just test themselves against the Phillies, see how good they really are, because, they're playing well in the second half, but they haven't beat any, what's the word I want to use? They haven't beat any true World Series contenders in the second half. Like, when they played the Cardinals, they got smacked against the Cardinals. So if they can play Philadelphia, who's coming into Arizona, if they could take down the Phillies, I think that would be pretty impressive by the D-backs and be some much needed momentum heading into next season. Maybe you feel more confident about yourselves, your squad heading into next year, and maybe you recalibrate your expectation levels going into next season, and you try to maybe go a little bit harder in this offseason than what you expected, depending on how the rest of the season plays out. But if you could perform well against the Phillies and maybe win this series, I think that would be a nice little glimpse into what the future could maybe be for the D-backs next season. So I like how the D-backs are playing right now, and let's keep it going against the Philadelphia Phillies.